This podcast is a production of WCWP, LIU Public Radio. Check out our lineup of original programs, listen live, or support by visiting WCWP.org.
This is a show that brings to the forefront newsmakers, entertainers, and those making a difference in our lives and in our world. Each week is a new adventure with topics ranging from the most serious and cutting edge to the most lighthearted and entertaining.
This is Taking Care of Business with Richard Solomon.
Greetings, everyone. Richard Solomon, Taking Care of Business. We got a wild show for you today. Hey, welcome. Thank you for listening. We have Michael Gurnow. Now, you may remember him because he's been on the show as a great past guest. He's the one who wrote the book Nature's Trailkeeper, and he actually wrote another book called The Edward Snowden Affair. So now he's taken on a whole new approach to the world, and he's become a bodybuilder. And if you look at the before and after pictures, you'll be amazed. And by the way, we're not selling anything here. It's not like, and hold on, operators for $19.95 and free shipping and double up, blah, blah, blah. But it's like amazing. So first of all, thank you for this opportunity for us to have a reunion and to talk once again on the radio. So thank you for that.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So you're now a bodybuilder and you have this incredible journey. So because this is radio, could you give us the visualization? Give us the before scenario. What were we looking at?
Oh, physically,
Yeah.
I was the stereotypical dweeby pencil pusher. I was 140 pounds at 5'10". My dress shirts hung like trash bags on me. Just a giraffe neck. There was nothing intimidating about me physically. That's the before. So when you think college English professor, I fit that bill perfectly.
All we need is the sweater.
Exactly.
Right? The sweater and the pipe.
Yep.
Okay.
Spot on. The after, it's just a simple matter of taking that person before and essentially doubling them. I'm now standing at 200 pounds. My biceps went from 11 inches to 17. It's just a full body transformation. In respect to, if this was witness protection program, you wouldn't be able to find me.
Right. We'd still be looking for that other guy.
Exactly.
All right. So this didn't happen overnight, and it had to happen with science. So let's talk about that.
Sure.
In pre-production we were talking. So just for the folks out there, to give you a little insight. We always talk a little bit before we do some recording, and one of the things that Michael and I were talking about was sort of like most people, at least from what I see, they go to the gym, they hit the circuit, they do the weights, they put the pin in the machine, they hit the stack, they do what the little chart says, and they get mediocre results. They sort of plateau. I think their muscles get used to the routines. There's really no big challenge. And then after a while they get bored and, they don't really know where to go from there. Obviously that was not your case. So how did you use science and psychology to get on this journey and stay and achieve what you did?
Oh, wow. That's a very broad spectrum question. I'll start with the science. I will state the success in bodybuilding comes down to one simple thing, and that's understanding the human body and how to get it to respond. It is 100% science-based. I do not know how many professional bodybuilders I spoke to during my research and during my training that documented everything from day to day, meal to meal. And there's a reason for that, because you can see the slightest changes. The body can be that responsive. But it's a simple matter of knowing how much fuel you need, meaning food, you need to put into your body to fuel it to get muscle growth to not only begin but continue at a steady rate of speed. Basically, all you're doing with bodybuilding is the opposite of cardio. You are trying to be as anabolic as possible and not let your body go into a catatonic state where the muscle is breaking itself down. You want it to repair itself, not deplete itself. So it's just science at its best, and you are the platform for it.
Well, let's use
decide.
okay.
Sure.
Let's use the word bodybuilding because it's a great term.
Yes.
Your bodybuilding. All right. So
Yeah.
so obviously there's scaffolding and excavators and all this construction equipment. So what was the sort of engineering design concept that you had in the beginning, and how much did that evolve?
Yeah. Okay. So for the listeners out there, the original conception of this was based on a joke. As a college professor, every class I had gave me some nickname. And towards the end of my teaching career, the first Thor movie had come out with Chris Hemsworth, and all the 4 pictures you can see I had long hair and I had the facial hair, but no physique at all. And just based on the hair alone, my students started calling me Thor that semester. And I thought nothing of it. And then a few years later, my wife and I were shopping for Halloween costumes, and she noticed that as I was thumbing through a rack of costumes, I saw the Thor, and I was just pausing on it to look at its design. And she noticed I'd paused. And she said, that wouldn't be a bad look. Why don't you get that? And I chuckled at her. I said, because this is a Norse god and there's nothing godlike about me. I said, it is my due respect for literary characters as an English professor to do justice to them, and there's no way I could do that. And we thought nothing more of it, and then that little bug planted in my head. And I thought, is it possible? And I just pushed it back. And not long after that, and this is where the fire started, I was watching a film called Crazy Sexy Love, I believe,
Okay.
with Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone. And at one point during the film, Emma Stone walks up to Gosling, he takes off his shirt, and she says, "Oh my God, you're photoshopped." And right there, it irritated me. I taught film for years. I knew the body transformations of some of these actors, and that's just yet another actor that I thought, okay, Hollywood's giving us this conception that this is only possible through Hollywood. Hemsworth is doing it. You see all the Marvel superhero actors doing it, and then we have rom-com people doing it now. And I thought, okay, this is enough. I'm just going to mix all this together and see if I can fit in that damn Thor costume, see if I can do what they're doing. So I ran the idea past my agent, called my publisher. They both started laughing, and right then I knew I had to do it. So we sat down with an agenda. Chris Hemsworth spent 4 months preparing for the first Thor role. He was, at the time, 10 years younger than me. He still is 10 years younger, but I thought, well, let's go ahead and give me a handicap there. I'll spend a year doing this and see what we have at the end of it. So I just sat down and looked at the math of how tall he was, his body weight, and approximated his body fat, and decided to match it based on my height. So that's how we got that absurd number of 40 pounds of muscle in 1 year and cutting the body fat down by a third. So that's how we set that goal. And once we had the goal, we had to figure out how the hell we were going to accomplish that.
Right.
So that's the genesis.
Okay, so now you had the engineering plan, all right?
Yep.
Now there's the execution. So obviously there's a lot of mobilization. You need to have the time. You need to do the shopping. You need to do the cooking and cutting and all the other stuff. And in some ways, you had to probably transform your lifestyle to right. You know, and I assume you're trying to work and do other things and add this whole new scope of work into your daily routine. So let's talk about that. The execution.
Sure. That year, I look back at it and think I don't understand how I found those many hours in a day, because typically as a writer, I would sit down and just research and write, which was a full-time job in of itself. And I realized with this, I would have to be doing the research, writing the weekly blog and doing all the social media with it so fans could keep up with it, as well as doing the training and the meal prep. And I thought, well, I've got no choice but to just knuckle down and do it. And my typical 8-hour day quickly became 15-hour days, because having to stop and actually train, you can't do any type of serious book reading. You can't sit there and type on a computer while you're doing this. You have to stay focused. And it was just really if you want to make a year pass quickly, pick up weight training and a full-time job, because it will whiz by if you do it properly, because you just don't have time to sit still. So the execution, the day-to-day routine was just, I got into a groove, and I was told to do that. I was told to be successful at bodybuilding is one simple thing. You have to make it a lifestyle, meaning you can't sit there and think to yourself, oh, I've got to get up and work out today. Oh, today's chest day. If you have that mentality, then you don't look forward to it. You're going to start finding excuses. It doesn't mean you have to jump up and down at the prospect of having to do lat raises, which is an exercise for shoulders, which most bodybuilders dislike because it's fairly painful. But what you do have to do is just accept the fact this is what I do now. It's just part of it. And your body will start responding positively. There is a psychological pickup with exercise, but then it gets a lot easier once you start seeing results. And that typically happens with beginners around month 3. I took a little bit longer because I have fairly weak genetics in that respect. I was never an athlete, so it took me longer to see results. But once I did, you start looking in the mirror and you just want to do it more because you want to see more. So you just have to have patience.
At this time, were you doing research through just sort of, literature review, or were you talking to people, or were you interviewing people, or were you consulting doctors, and exercise physiologists? Like, what were you getting? What were you drawing upon?
That's a great question. I was trying to get information anywhere I could. I deliberately walked into the project as an unmolded ball of clay because I wanted to, if I could succeed doing this, serve as a model to everyone else. If the average Joe with no background in weight training can spend a year doing it and look even slightly Hollywood-esque, I thought, well, that'll be an inspiration to others to do the same. So once I started November 1st, so I could fit in that costume October 31st of the following year, I just started weight training, and there's a very fierce learning curve. I realized within the first 3 weeks I need to go consult a personal trainer. And we already had on the books that I would meet some professional bodybuilders, but I also started doing literature past that first day. So I read books. I consulted doctors, nutritionists. I introduced myself to several professional bodybuilders, just everything I could. And it became a lot simpler because the people that do this tend to enjoy it. So they tend to be rather rabid, and they will just throw information in your direction because they enjoy it. They get giddy at the prospect of doing it. They like seeing other people do it. So they can't get enough of talking about it. So the research got fairly easy when I started talking to the professionals that did it because they wanted to talk about it. So it is infectious.
The way I see some of this, it looks like there's 3 vectors. There's the physics of how leverage movement, burning muscle, this and that. There is the nutrition part of it, which is loading in all of the, I guess, amino acids and this and that and all the things that will appropriately, burst into muscle mass, burn right, help burn fat, all the other stuff. And then there's the psychological component of discipline and not being and fighting boredom and like you said, the routine and stuff like that. So what in those 3 fields did you use as far as I know you spoke to a lot of people, but was there any one particular theme in each category? Like, was there like one nutritionist or one nutritionist where you had to like invent it from all these other plans? And as far as psychological stuff, did you have to talk to different people or train other people? Sometimes they tell you that in order to understand something, they make you teach it to other people who understand less than you do, because it forces you to know, as much as you can to actually help others. So what were the things that were going on in those realms?
Well, in respect to the physics, and I have to say you broke that down perfectly. I think a lot of professional bodybuilders would sit there and state, okay, those are the three divisions. I mean, that's very well done. The physics, the actual movement element, having done the research, got the results, looking back, what was the most beneficial. I tell beginners this all the time. Schwarzenegger did not invent bodybuilding, but he had to take it to a different level that we hadn't seen before. So he figured out a lot of things the hard way, and the things that he discovered that he relayed are pretty standard, and they worked for him, and they worked for everyone. So I tell everyone, his Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, as absurd as it sounds, that's the first book I read on the subject, and it's 800 pages, but to be clear, a lot of it's photographs. That's a wonderful starting point. I tell people, start with Arnold, move over to Jay Cutler. Jay Cutler was a four-time Mr. Olympia, and for people that don't know bodybuilding, every year there's a contest for best bodybuilder in the world. And the way you qualify for that is you win a professional show, and then you go to compete in the Olympia, the Super Bowl of bodybuilding. And Jay Cutler won 4 times. He was the very first bodybuilder that I got to sit down and talk with. And his advice on his videos and all his literature on his website, he just has this knack for being able to hone down to the essentials. And if you have an opportunity to speak to him, it's amazing because he's a phenomenal coach. He can just narrow down on what your particular weakness is and tell you how to solve it within 5-10 minutes of a conversation. Every time I meet Jay, I tell him, this is where I'm at, and he'll say, well, why don't you try this? This will work for you. And I go back and I just see results.
Wow.
So Jay Cutler and Schwarzenegger on the physics side, I cannot recommend highly enough.
All right, so wait, hold it right there. Believe it or not, we're coming up to our first break. Everybody hang on. This is Michael Gurnow, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Richard Sullivan, Taking Care of Business. I am delighted with a capital D, to have Michael Gurnow on the show. It's Gurnow, and if you checked out that name on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and probably all kinds of other cool stuff, you'll see some impressive information by an impressive individual with some very impressive photos. Right now, I'm the before person, so that's why I'm behind the microphone. All right, so we were asking and talking about what I thought were the 3 sort of vectors, and we were talking about physics, and now we're going to go into sort of the biochemistry. Unless you want to add something to what we were talking about before I cut you off because I had to take the break.
Oh, no, I think we were good, yeah.
Good. All right. So in this segment, let's keep plowing forward like a workout. So let's talk about sort of the biochemistry, because you got all your physics and your workout routines and all this other stuff, but fuel, building blocks. All right. You see on television, people eating, raw eggs and running up staircases and, all this stuff. But it really probably is much more complicated than that. And I have a feeling that it's also when you eat and how much water you take in and what kinds of protein and do certain kinds of proteins work better than other kinds of proteins? And talk to me about all that.
Exactly. For me, of the three things, the most important is food. And I think there's very few professionals that would argue with that, because I think the mantra is it's 70% what you eat, 30% exercise. But if you do not eat, you do not recover properly. And a lot of people, they get confused because they'll start going to the gym thinking, I'm going to lose some weight and get ripped. Well, that's going two different directions. The reason for that is, to put simply, bodybuilders look great, they look ripped, they look massively strong like a Hulk, but if you go backstage during a bodybuilding contest, they've actually cut all the fat out. They're on extremely low carbs and have been for quite some time. They've actually depleted their bodies so the aesthetics are there. This is opposed to if you watch a strongman competition. These are very large individuals that are carrying quite a bit of body fat on them, which they're using as fuel, and they're massively strong. This is the two polarities of weight training. You can be big and strong, or ripped and fairly weak. So it depends on really what you're wanting out of this, but you can't have your cake and eat it too, so to speak.
No pun intended.
Weight, exactly. I think the core principle that joins the two is you cannot outrun your fork, meaning if what you put in is bad, you're going to get bad results. You've got to clean up your diet, because you can shove in all the calories you would need for a workout, but if they're bad calories, they're going to, for lack of a better term, burn very poorly. It's a poor fuel source, and you'll feel it. You'll get tired more quickly. The engine's not running well. So what's it come down to? I had to make a complete lifestyle change. First of all, I was a stereotypical artist writer, so I would drink most of my calories in soda, and I was a smoker, because writers, we like stimulants. We like to keep that brain churning constantly. And that was very counterproductive, because liquid calories will get you nowhere in weight training. So I had to drop the soda, drop the caffeine, clearly throw out the cigarettes, and just start fresh. But for me, and as any bodybuilder will tell you, the hardest part of weight training is eating, because you have to eat a lot and frequently. The reason for that is when you weight train and you bring your muscle to exhaustion, you're actually creating micro tears in that muscle fiber. And what happens is the body will repair those tears by building over the top of it. Basically, it's just a poor man's version of scar tissue. And you tear it again, and there's a layer on top of that, a layer on top of that, and you can now visualize muscle building and getting rounder and stacking on top of itself. And that's actually how muscles are built. But a lot of people make the mistake of not understanding how muscle repairs itself. Muscle must have protein to rebuild. If it does not have the protein it needs, it will find the protein somewhere else, which is existing muscle tissue. So you can actually make the mistake of going out, working out very intensely, getting those microfiber tears, and not doing your recovery properly, not eating properly, and your body will break down existing muscle to repair that muscle, and it's just a gerbil wheel of redundancy. So you've got to have a certain amount of protein based on how much you're working out, your body weight, a certain amount of carbs, fats. You drink a certain amount of water depending on where you're at, on what stage of your training. It's all very complex, and I will tell listeners, if you go to a dietitian, that's a good starting point if you're going into weight training to get a little bit more tone. But if you're looking to build muscle, you need to find someone that has a sports and nutrition background, because those diets are very different from just a average Joe healthy eating diet regimen.
So are all proteins created equal?
It's a wonderful question. The body doesn't care if your protein comes from a powder or from a steak. Protein is protein in that capacity. Now, the difference between the two, most protein powders have enzymes in them that will make them digest either fairly rapidly, extremely rapidly, a little bit more slowly, but a powder versus food that you would have to sit down and chew, it's very easy to understand. The sit-down meal will take longer to digest, and it will stay with you longer. The protein powder will break down very quickly, regardless of what type of protein. So on paper, it does not matter, but in respect to how many calories, how many grams of protein you have to eat throughout the day and at what times, it makes a huge difference. If you've got a meal that's coming in an hour, then protein powder right now is a wise choice. But if you're looking at, I'm not going to be able to eat for the next 3 hours because I've got to drive across town for a business meeting, then you sit down and make the time to eat the steak. So it's all about pre-planning and knowing what you're going to need on that particular day.
Now, is it better to eat before the workout or after, or a little bit of both? How's the timing work?
I'm learning something new every day. I've done this for 4 years now. After Thor was a success, I was bit by the bodybuilding bug, and anyone that's done this seriously and seen results will always tell you, I just wanted to see more. How big could I get? Could I get to bench pressing 300 pounds? They want to challenge themselves. So interesting you would say that, because throughout Thor, I would keep the same routine every single day, because to watch the body respond and gauge it accurately, you need consistency. So you eat at the same time each day, train at the same time each day, get the same amount of sleep, and that way you can chart how your body's responding. There's no variables, and especially multiple variables that could be impacting this and that, and you have to work your way through it and figure out where the culprit lies. For me, throughout that process, I would get up, eat one meal, train, and then eat the rest of my meals throughout the day, then go to sleep, and didn't give it much thought. This year, due to with COVID having lapsed and getting back out, I've had to recently change my schedule for the first time in 4 years, and I thought, well, this shouldn't be a huge factor. I get up now, I eat a majority of my meals, train, eat a meal, then go to bed. Well, what I've already discovered in 3 weeks' time, is I'm holding less weight. I've lost 3.5 pounds, although I'm eating the same calories, and I'm actually slightly weaker. I've lost a little bit of strength on the bench press. And the reason for that is my body is trying to recover on one meal, and then it fasts for 8 hours of sleep, and then it gets its next meal whenever I wake up. So it's not got as much fuel in its backstock to repair itself with. So it definitely, to answer your question, matters when you eat in respect to when you train.
All right, let me ask you a bizarre question.
Sure.
Travel. Let's say you actually keep the time and your routine, but you travel around. How does that affect your body? The stress of travel, and not the same water, and maybe not the same kind of food. I mean, not every steak is the same, and not every, whatever.
Exactly.
So how does that impact the situation?
Oh, travel is horrible. Anyone that does weight training, that attempts to go somewhere to do a show, you'll quickly appreciate just you going to witness someone doing this, because it will throw off your routine. It will, even if you do meal prep, meaning you're going to cook the same foods and put them in Tupperware and take them with you that you would normally eat at home, there's a difference the way your body will approach, food that's a day old that's reheated versus right now. It'll digest differently. And listeners might think, it can't make that much of a difference. The body is a very sensitive machine. and you'll notice these differences, especially when you get in the weight room. And once you experience that, you'll have a greater appreciation for competitors. They travel from all across the world, and I often boggle, how does a power lifter sit there and state, all right, I'm going to bench press 500 at the meet. I can barely get 500 here at my gym. What am I going to lose in stress? Water weight, travel time, throwing off my meals. I often wonder, do they calibrate and give themselves a 10-pound allowance on that bench press? I assume that they probably get there and figure out how they feel that day. I also know some competitors will actually travel to wherever a competition is 3 weeks before and rent a hotel, and that's very smart. They're allowing that body to recalibrate to a new system and get back into a rhythm. So, yeah, travel is a nemesis to weight training, in my opinion, to be quite honest.
Well, what's interesting, in the world of academics, they say that you should take the test, you should study in the same place that you're going to take the test. So when I was in law school, I noticed that some people would actually study all the time in the lecture halls in which the tests were deployed. And I was like, aha. Now, I didn't do that. But I was just more of a kind of guy that just, I don't know, wherever I was, I just was. If it was on the subway, if it was in the library, classroom, whatever. But there were people who, and I think they had something there. They were, taking advantage of every opportunity to get an edge. So that's interesting. Now, I'll tell you a quick story that I remember. Right? So a long time ago, they were filming the movie True Lies. And it happened to be in a neighborhood that I used to frequent. And Arnold was there. And, it was interesting. They would always film the movie between like 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. And a friend of mine was like a big movie nut. So he was always like, I gotta see this, And what was interesting is Arnold had a trailer. It was a big, the 18-wheeler type of trailer. And in there was a gym, and he would do a scene or this or that, and he would actually go into the trailer and work out. and I thought, I don't know, is this for the fans? Is this just for appearance? But in talking to you, it makes a lot of sense that he was doing that because he had to get his workout in somewhere. And if you can't go to the gym, then maybe you just bring it with you.
And it's interesting you had someone that witnessed that in person because in the bodybuilding community, we hear rumor that he had a trailer brought down to the jungles of Mexico whenever he shot Predator. And so I've never heard that he did that for True Lies. It made sense for Predator because, of course, they were largely shirtless throughout the filming of that, but he wanted to maintain that muscle mass even with True Lies. So, yeah, that's apparently something that he did fairly consistently.
Yeah,
so
I saw it. I saw it. It was unbelievable. Yeah, it's like,
wow.
Because what was interesting is everybody in the area would come and watch the filming, and I guess the big thing is they filmed this in between two houses. So they built the house in between two houses. It was like a fake house. Yep. And then I think the last thing is they blew the house up.
Right, yeah.
And everybody was like wild. It was really cool. It was like the most interesting thing that happened for miles in any direction. But I was there and I saw him literally working out in his trailer. And, like the 18-wheeler kind of like the tractor-trailer combo. Right. Only the tractor wasn't there. And, it didn't look like it was, the greatest, most expensive equipment. It just looked like standard, gym equipment. Yeah. But and now that I'm here, fast forward all these years later, I'm like, well, it all makes sense now.
Yes, exactly. And to add to that, to give people an inside view of what happens with Hollywood sets, Chris Evans stated on record, whenever we get to set and we've been training for months, we always do the shirtless scenes right off the bat because the diet's a pain in the ass to get that stripped down, to get those abs showing. So we make sure to shoot that so that we can go back to a more sensible diet because not only can we eat a little bit more lax because it's hard to stay stringent, maintaining that diet around a sporadic, erratic filming schedule, but also training is inconsistent for them as soon as they step foot on set, so they lose some of that mass the further along they get into the film. And we've seen this throughout the history of Hollywood. Some recent examples: Kevin Spacey with American Beauty in '99 was training in between takes because he had to get bigger during the filming, which is just mind-boggling to me how he could stay focused with that. Christian Bale reportedly trained 8 hours a day for American Psycho because he was cut down throughout that entire shooting. So it's pretty remarkable when you look at the science and look at how some people have performed under pressure with sporadic schedules. So yeah, I mean, spot on.
All right. So this is Richard Sullivan with Michael Gurnow, and we're just blazing through this radio show. We'll be right back. All right, everybody. Richard Sullivan, Michael Gurnow. Go check out his social media. He's all over the place. Michael, Gurnow, all one word. Find it, search it. Fascinating. To say that he's a Renaissance man is sort of just underplaying what other Renaissance people did. He author, professor. I guess bodybuilder, molecular biologist, nature lover. Just all kinds of things. Researcher, intellect. So many hats that he has worn in so many shifts. So I am going to ask you a little bit about psychology in weight and bodybuilding, but I do have to ask because the question just kind of came into my head here. You like to shake it up. You like to shake it up because you went from a book about espionage to a book about nature, which you called an environmental comedy, right? And now you've gone into something completely different. Is it just one of those things you like to transform yourself? And I mean that really because, the weight building, the bodybuilding weight, accumulation is a transformation. It was a physical transformation. Is that an extension of all of your intellectual transformations?
I actually think it is. Someone joked that I switched from intellectual pursuits to physical pursuits because I ran out of things to deal with intellectually, and I chuckled because that's not even remotely close. I like, my training in academia is actually comedy, so I like things that are ludicrous, absurd, inadvertently comical, and as I relayed earlier in the show, the way we stumbled into this transformation challenge with, Chris Hemsworth and everything, it just was so absurd to me mentally that someone that looked the way I did at 140 pounds could do that. But then I realized, Gosling was twig thin at one point. You saw early pictures of Hugh Jackman before he appeared as Wolverine the first time. Extremely thin. He cut a very Clint Eastwood-esque silhouette. So I like challenges. I like doing new things, and I swung pretty wide on this, admittedly. But I do. I like to do different things. I like to dive in head first, and this was a shock to me in retrospect. I would have not anticipated doing something this far out from my normal intellectual pursuits, but it is what it is.
It's very cool. It's very cool. I look forward to whatever the next endeavor is and hope that you include me in the radio and media part of that.
Oh, most definitely.
All right. So now that we've asked that and talked about the psychology of transformation a little bit and the motivation, let's talk about the psychology of weight training.
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
I guess the first question is, if you're set back, that could be a tremendous psychological block and obstruction.
Yeah.
How do you, and I guess injuries, let's talk about that for 1 second too. There have to be injuries because in every sport, even swimming, there's always an injury.
Exactly.
How do you deal with the physics of injuries? How do you deal with the psychological disruption caused by injury?
Exactly. And that's spot on there with the disruption, because it interrupts the routine. With weight training, as I stated, it's all about consistency. You want to see progression here. You need to keep things on track so you can compare one day to the next. And an injury will slow that down. A severe enough injury will stop it dead. And so I think this is the difference between someone training successfully in the gym versus a stop-start. People that get impatient and want to see results now, they'll push themselves too hard. It doesn't mean you can't challenge yourself. You have to challenge yourself in weight training by always trying to get an extra rep in, trying to push an extra 5 pounds. That's the only way you continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But it doesn't mean you have to spend 5 hours in the gym and only allow yourself a 2-minute break throughout that 5 hours. It's just absurd. Muscle fiber tears at fractions of a millimeter, so it takes a long time. Most bodybuilders would tell you, I trained seriously for 10 years. We've heard many Mr. Olympias use that exact phrase. It took me 10 years to get here. So 10 years means training approximately 6 days a week, roughly an hour and a half a day. Most of them split it up to 45 minutes each. But it just depends on your approach, but consistency. But to answer your question, injury, it is devastating. It's a blow because you want to progress, and whenever you have an injury, not only are you slowing down or stopping dead, if you're stopping dead, you're actually regressing because you're going to lose mass. You're going to lose time that you're going to have to build up back to where you were. And it's mentally crushing. I had several of those instances, especially early on. I'm trying to figure out how to do the body movements on certain exercises was a steep learning curve. But then shortly after Thor ended, I wound up with liver failure. The doctors assumed it was something I'd eaten, and it was fairly devastating because I lost 15 pounds in approximately 6 days.
Wow.
Which is not unusual for bodybuilders. We are eating an abnormally large amount of food and putting on mass the body wouldn't normally entertain or maintain, for that matter. The human body is very efficient. It's economical in that it streamlines itself to do the most amount of work with the least amount of resources, so to speak. And if you overburden it, it will try to slough off that burden. So that's why people will maintain a certain weight without trying. But with weight training, you build up that mass, and you've got to maintain it, because if you start missing meals or you don't train as much, you'll start losing weight almost immediately. It's pretty shocking, to be honest. But yeah, over that short period, I lost quite a bit of weight, and whenever I got out of the ER and got on the road to recovery, it took me a full month to get back to where I was in the gym. And that doesn't sound like a lot to most people, but that was 24 days of me sitting there thinking I could be this much further ahead, which for bodybuilders, they understand. For the average Joe, you look back at your career as a bodybuilder, you think, if I had an extra month, if I wouldn't have got injured that one day, I might have been able to bench press 350 before it was all said and done. The older you get, the more important that time becomes. So, because you can't bodybuild forever, and at a certain point you'll have diminishing returns. So, you just got to be mindful of what you're doing, have patience, and when in doubt, let off the gas just a little. Not too much, just a little, because you'd rather train tomorrow than get that one rep that's going to tear that bicep today. So that's how you go about it.
So tell me about the liver failure. What was it caused by ultimately?
It was indeterminate. They assumed that it was something I'd eaten, and any listeners that are bodybuilders will chuckle at this. We typically will stay on a very stringent diet, but we will, depending on the individual, have a cheat meal once a week. Some people will have a cheat food once a day. I would every Monday go and eat fish and chips.
Okay.
And if there was a culprit there, that was it, because otherwise all my food was prepared at home. I was on a very strict regimen. That's what they assumed. But that sideswiped me entirely. Did not see it coming, did not have a family history of it, so it was alarming, sudden, and quite unpleasant. I will say that.
Now, did you need to do things like liver cleanses and sort of like herbal stuff to help you recover on that basis?
Their approach was they just kept giving me IV to flush out my liver as quickly as possible. And because it was indeterminate, they really couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, and they sent me home and said, "This will go away. The liver has this great ability to repair itself." So it did, and but during that month, you just sit there as a bodybuilder thinking, I'm getting smaller. I'm getting smaller. The shirts that you spent a long time to fill up are now getting looser and looser. But you have to accept the fact that's part of the game. You're not going to be able to be a bodybuilder, decide to be a bodybuilder at 16 and make it to 45 without having an off day or getting sick and losing and having to come back. That's just part of being human. It's part of being an athlete. So it is what it is.
So what are the other psychological factors? Like getting into the gym and not being bored and not and fighting plateaus. How does all that work?
Oh, good question. So I think those are the two that would come up most often in conversation. Beginners, I don't know how often after I finished Thor and people saw the before after photographs, they would contact me on social media saying, I've started, but then I've stopped because I hurt myself. For me, when I started the project, it was the first time I thought I might not succeed. Every time I sit down to write a book, I know it's just due diligence, do the research, get it written. With bodybuilding, I didn't know if I had the genetics to do it, but I said to myself, even if I don't succeed, there are some great books on people failing epically, which would be just as wonderful. So early on, I had that question in my mind. Can I pull this off? Am I embarrassing myself? Especially with some movements being particular exercises where I didn't know how they functioned properly, and I pulled a muscle, strained, maybe a partial tear occurred, you never know, where it slowed me down. But it's where a veteran bodybuilder sits there and knows how to train other body parts and identify what happened in this instance and also how not to tempt fate. And you learn very quickly in bodybuilding. I will say I could tell you there's a difference between the before and after me bodybuilding. Before, something would hurt on me, I would just lump it into, I pulled something. Now as a bodybuilder, I can tell you the difference between muscle soreness, a strain, a pull, and I know how to approach each of them differently and to work around them or to relax them and treat them. A lot of people get frustrated early on. They go too hard. They have severe soreness, or they pull something and they think it's just not worth it and they quit. Patience, again, is key. Education is key. Find someone that knows what they're doing. Read books. Watch videos. Ask questions is I think, main agenda there for beginners. In respect to plateaus, that's whenever you start weight training, you get a good hold for it, you're going to show massive improvement, especially early on. And then it will start slowing down because your body can only develop to a certain degree, and your what's called gains, muscle gains, will become more and more gradual. And that's where perseverance comes in. You'll get to a point, and it took me about 3 years. I continued to add weight to my bench press, and that's what society sees as the benchmark for weight training. How much can you bench? I started at 110, and I didn't really start slowing down. I would always have the goal of 25 pounds every 6 months.
Wow.
And I just kept building. And I laughed at myself going, okay, I might have had some hidden genetics allowing me to do this because the average male weight training their entire life maxes out around 300. Some more, some less, but that's the average male. And here I am, in my early 40s. So I realized there were some genetics I wasn't even aware I had, but I also knew that this train was going to start slowing down pretty quickly at some point, and it did. But this is the difference. True bodybuilders that have 18-inch biceps might have worked 3 years to go from 17 to 18. The bodybuilders that got frustrated because they did not see continued growth at a fast rate of speed stopped at 17, might get to 17 and a half coming and going because they just don't want to continue to do the same work if they're not seeing, if they're not being visually gratified constantly as they were in the early stages. There's an individual I know that he spent 4 years to add 60 pounds to a deadlift. And you think, why is it worth it? And for him, he would sit there and state, I can now lift 700 pounds. If I wouldn't have continued to stay with this, I would have never got there. So you have to have this clarity of vision. I've got to just keep going. The progress might be so gradual that I have to chart it on a monthly basis, not a weekly. But you just keep doing it. And that's the difference between someone that is outstanding and someone that's good.
So we only have about a minute left.
Sure.
Sad, because this is fascinating stuff. Are the bodybuilders of today at a better advantage because the science, nutrition, and and the psychological information is more evolved today than it was, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago?
You're asking if they have better data to run off of.
Yeah.
I think the science is better. I think they've got more statistics to work off of, to make plans to calibrate with. But I also think they take advantage of science more than they should. In Arnold's day, you only had a handful of directions you could take things and play with those variables. Now there's a lot more variables that if you turn them all up to 10 at the same time, you're in danger area. I mean, I think the advantages are there, but I think the challenge to be the best, and in order to be the best, you've got to go whole hog at all times on all cylinders, I think is too great. And I think it's why we're seeing a lot of bodybuilders succumb to injury and serious health problems.
In the last 30 seconds, what is the greatest thing that you've gotten out of this whole journey?
I surprised myself. I stepped outside of my comfort zone, and I not only rose to that challenge, but succeeded against all odds that I thought were possible. If you would have told me I could have done this 5 years ago, I would have laughed at your face, just like my agent, my publisher. It started as a joke, and I turned it into something that has bragging rights.
All right. And brag you shall. All right. Richard Sullivan with Michael Gurnow, an accomplished person in so many levels. Check him out. See his social media. Read his books. He's awesome. Go on to all the social media out there. Gurnow is the last name. Look it up. Facebook, Twitter, and Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. There you go. And then whatever else they invent along the way. So for all of those out there listening, hope you were inspired. Stay well, be safe. See you next time.
What I really need, some kind of affection. All that I have is this mental infection.
Like what you hear? Here's how you can let us know. Give us a call at 516-299-2626 or email us at info@wcwp.org. Like us at facebook.com/mywcwp and leave a comment or tweet us at mywcwp. We welcome all kinds of feedback. To directly support the podcast you just enjoyed, leave a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to give back, visit wcwp.org and click the support tab. Thanks for listening from your friends at WCWP.